"I need to warm up tonight," said the Apache girl. And the rancher agreed. The sun had already dipped behind the distant hills when the rancher finished his day's work. The sky was painted in deep shades of orange and purple, and the cold air of early evening brushed against his face. He had been out on the plains since sunrise, tending to his cattle, repairing fences and checking water troughs. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but he moved with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for the land. Despite the chill, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The ranch was his life, and he took pride in every corner of it, from the dusty barn to the wide open fields where the cattle roamed freely. As he walked back toward the house, he noticed a figure in the distance. At first he thought it might be one of the neighbors passing through, but as he got closer he saw it was a young girl. She was small, her shoulders hunched as if trying to protect herself from the cold wind. Her dark hair fell over her face, and her clothes looked worn and thin against the chill of the evening. Something about her made him pause. She seemed out of place here on the wide plains, and yet there was a quiet strength in her stance, a determination that he recognized from years of working the land. The girl noticed him too, her eyes meeting his. For a moment neither spoke. The wind rustled the dry grass around them, carrying with it the smell of earth and livestock. The rancher could see her lips trembling, not just from the cold but perhaps from fear or fatigue. She took a small step forward, and then another, as if deciding whether to approach him. He waited silently, understanding that she was trying to measure whether he could be trusted. In these plains, strangers were rare, and trust had to be earned carefully. "Finally," she spoke, her voice soft but steady. I need to warm up tonight," she said. The words were simple, but there was an urgency in them that touched the rancher. It was not a demand or a plea, just a statement of need. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her body shivered slightly despite her attempts to keep warm. Something stirred in him, a mix of compassion and a sense of responsibility. The plains could be harsh at night, and even a short journey could be dangerous for someone unprepared for it. The rancher nodded slowly, a small gesture meant to reassure her. "You can come with me," he said. "The house isn't far, and there's a fire already going. You'll be warm there."
He spoke in a calm, even tone, one that carried no judgment, only a quiet invitation.
The girl's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time he saw a hint of relief cross her face. She took another step forward, then a few more, until she was close enough that he could see the dirt on her boots and the tired lines on her face. It was clear she had been traveling for a long time. As they walked together toward the ranch house, the rancher took note of the small details about her. She carried a small bag, worn at the corners, likely containing everything she owned. Her clothes, though patched in places, were clean, showing that she cared for them despite the long journey. He noticed the way she held herself, cautiously but with a quiet confidence, as if she had learned to be careful in the world but not afraid. There was something familiar in her presence, a resilience he respected deeply. In his own life he had faced long days and nights of hard work, and he could sense that she had endured challenges in her own way. The house came into view, its wooden walls glowing warmly in the fading light. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning wood and something savory, perhaps stew or freshly baked bread. The rancher opened the door and gestured for her to enter. "Come on in," he said. "It's warm inside." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped over the threshold, the relief on her face now more obvious. She pulled off her coat and wrapped it tightly around herself, drawing in a deep breath of the warm air. It smelled of wood, earth, and home, a comfort she hadn't felt for some time. The rancher led her to a chair near the fireplace. The flames danced in the hearth, casting a golden glow across the room. He could see her shiver slowly subside as the heat reached her. She sank into the chair, closing her eyes for a moment, as if letting the warmth seep into her very bones. He placed a cup of hot tea in front of her, the steam rising and curling into the air. She took it in both hands, the warmth of the cup matching the warmth of the fire. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about comfort and care. As she sipped the tea, the rancher busied himself around the room. He fetched a blanket and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. She smiled faintly, a gesture that felt fragile but genuine. In that quiet room surrounded by the glow of the fire and the soft creaks of the wooden house settling, a fragile trust began to form. Neither spoke much, but, in the silence, there was understanding. Sometimes words were not necessary. Actions spoke louder, offering warmth, a safe place, a listening ear. These small gestures mattered more than anything else. The rancher studied her carefully. He wondered what had brought her here, to this remote place on the plains. The journey could not have been easy, and yet she had made it. There was a quiet determination in her that reminded him of the way he had approached his own life, step by step, day by day, with patience and perseverance. He admired that strength, even as he recognized the vulnerability she carried. But it was a delicate balance, strength and vulnerability, that made her presence so compelling. She began to speak softly, sharing fragments of her story. She told him she was from the Apache community, traveling to see family and friends in distant places. Her voice was calm but tinged with weariness, as if the long journey had taken more out of her than she could show. The rancher listened attentively, nodding occasionally, not interrupting, allowing her to speak at her own pace. He understood that trust was built slowly, and she was testing the waters before fully opening up. In that room, with the fire crackling and the wind howling outside, a connection began to form, a bridge between two lives that might otherwise have never crossed. As the evening wore on, the rancher prepared a simple meal for them both. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and keeping an eye on the fire. She watched quietly, offering small comments and questions, not out of politeness, but out of genuine curiosity. It was clear she had spent time around homes and kitchens before, learning the skills needed to care for herself and others. Their conversation grew gradually, touching on everyday life, work, and the small joys and challenges that shaped their days. There was a rhythm to it, a gentle flow that made the room feel warmer than the fire alone could.
Outside, the wind continued to blow, rattling the windows and carrying the smell of the plains.
Inside, however, the world felt smaller, more contained, more humane. In that small room, the rancher and the Apache girl shared a moment of peace amidst the vast, often unforgiving landscape. The simple act of offering warmth had blossomed into something deeper, a sense of human connection, trust, and understanding. She laughed softly at a story he told about a mischievous calf that had escaped its pen, and he smiled at her amusement, feeling a rare lightness in his chest.
For a moment, the hardships of their lives seemed to fade, replaced by the warmth of shared presence.
As the night grew darker, the rancher could see that the girl's exhaustion was slowly giving way to comfort. Her shivers had ceased, her eyes were brighter, and her posture had relaxed. She seemed more at ease, more at home, even in a place so far from where her journey had begun. He recognized that warmth came in more forms than fire alone. Kindness, understanding, and acceptance were just as vital, sometimes more so. The night had begun as a simple offering of shelter, but it had become an exchange of humanity, a quiet affirmation that people could care for one another, even in small, unassuming ways. By the time the clock chimed softly, marking the late hour, the rancher felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had done what he could to help someone in need, and in doing so had reminded himself of the simple joys of connection. The Apache girl rested, her hands wrapped around the cup of tea, eyes half closed, a faint smile playing on her lips. Outside, the plains were cold and vast, But inside there was warmth, safety, and a fragile trust that had begun to bloom. It was the beginning of something meaningful. A story that neither of them could yet fully understand, but one that promised moments of learning, empathy, and shared experience in the nights to come. The fire in the ranch house crackled quietly, sending gentle waves of warmth across the room. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside, the world felt calm and safe. The Apache girl sat wrapped in a blanket, her hand still holding the warm cup of tea the rancher had given her. Breath. She took small sips, letting the heat seep into her chest and arms, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply relax. It had been a long, exhausting journey, and the warmth of the fire, the tea, and the safety of the room was almost overwhelming. She felt a relief she hadn't known in days. The rancher watched her quietly from across the room. He had returned to his chair after ensuring that everything was in order. Firewood stacked, doors locked, and the animals safe in their pens. He noticed the way she observed the room, looking at the wooden walls, the simple furniture, and the way the flames cast dancing shadows on everything. Her eyes were curious but careful, as if she was taking in every detail while making sure she remained respectful and unobtrusive.
He admired that about her. Even after a long journey, she carried herself with dignity and awareness.
Bray. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You're home. It feels safe," she said, her words carrying more weight than a simple observation. It was a truth she hadn't spoken aloud before. She rarely felt safe in the world outside her community. The rancher nodded, understanding. "It's not much, but it's warm," he replied, a quiet pride in his voice. "And everyone who comes here is welcome, even strangers." He paused for a moment, unsure if she would accept the kindness so freely offered, but she nodded, her face softening with gratitude. The Apache girl took another sip of her tea, then looked at him with curiosity. "You live here alone?" she asked, her tone more of wonder than accusation. The rancher chuckled softly. "Mostly. I've some help now and then, and the cattle keep me company," he said, his eyes glinting with a hint of humor. She smiled faintly, imagining the vast plains, the cows grazing in the quiet of the ranch. It must have been a lonely life at times, but it also had its own beauty, something she could sense even from the short time she had spent there. As the night grew darker, the rancher decided to make a simple dinner. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, chopping vegetables and stirring pots, occasionally glancing at the girl to ensure she was comfortable. She watched quietly at first, then began to ask questions. "Do you always cook like that?" she asked, her voice curious. "Every night," he replied with a small smile. "When you live on the plains, you learn to make do with what you have. Fresh food, fire, and a bit of patience. Those are the things that matter most." She nodded, absorbing his words, realizing there was a kind of wisdom in his simplicity. As the meal cooked, they began to talk more about their lives. The Apache girl shared stories of her childhood in the Apache community, the songs sung around the fire, the lessons learned from elders, and the times spent running freely through open lands. She spoke of the long walks she had taken, the people she had met, and the lessons she had learned from hardships along the way. Her voice carried both pride and a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from growing up fast in a world that is not always gentle. The rancher listened, fascinated by her stories, feeling that every word she spoke painted a picture of resilience and courage. In turn, the rancher shared stories of his own life. He spoke of early mornings on the ranch, when the sky was still dark and the only sound was the wind brushing over the grass. He told her about the stubborn cattle that refused to be herded, the storms that came without warning, and the long nights spent fixing fences by lantern light. He shared memories of family and friends, of lessons learned from years of working the land, and the quiet satisfaction that came from a hard day's work done well. His voice was steady, warm, and full of a quiet strength that came from living close to the earth. The girl listened, captivated, realizing that his life, though different from hers, carried its own beauty and wisdom. As they talked, they discovered that despite their different backgrounds, they shared many values. Both had learned to respect nature, to be self-reliant, and to value honesty and hard work. Both understood the importance of family and community, even if the definitions of family were different. Each had faced challenges and hardships in their own way, learning lessons about patience, courage, and trust. The conversation flowed easily, as if the fire itself had softened the boundaries between them, allowing them to speak freely and honestly. The girl hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever been afraid out here?" The rancher paused, considering the question. "Of course," he said finally. "The plains can be dangerous. Storms, wild animals, accidents, they're all part of life here. But you learn to face them. Fear teaches you caution, but it shouldn't stop you from living."
She nodded thoughtfully, realizing that his courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it.
It was a lesson she could carry with her, one that would help her in her own travels and challenges. The night deepened, and the meal was ready. The rancher served a simple dinner: stew, bread, and some fresh vegetables. They ate together in companionable silence at first, enjoying the warmth, the food, and the comfort of being indoors. But occasionally they exchanged small comments or smiles, acknowledging the shared meal and the quiet pleasure of human connection. The fire crackled nearby, and outside the wind continued to blow, but inside there was a sense of peace and safety that neither had expected at the beginning of the evening. After dinner, the rancher cleared the table while the girl sat by the fire, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The warmth had not only comforted her body, but had begun to ease the tension in her mind. She felt safe here, something rare in her life of traveling and uncertainty. The rancher returned to his chair and offered her a seat nearby. "Rest," he said quietly. "You've had a long day, and the fire will keep you warm." She nodded, grateful for his gentle words, and settled into the chair, closing her eyes for a moment. As they rested, the rancher noticed that she occasionally glanced toward the window, watching the shadows of the night stretch across the plains. There was a quiet longing in her eyes, a desire for something familiar or comforting. He understood.
Even in the safety of the house, the mind often wandered to the places we leave behind, the people we miss, and the paths we travel alone.
He did not interrupt, knowing that silence could be as comforting as conversation. In that quiet shared space, a deeper connection began to form, one built on understanding, respect, and the simple act of being present for another person. Pray. Finally, she began to speak again, this time about the journey that had brought her here. She told him about the long roads, the dusty trails, and the nights spent under open skies. She spoke of the people she had met and the kindnesses they had shown, as well as the moments of hardship that tested her strength. Her words were calm, but they carried emotion, painting a vivid picture of her life and experiences. The rancher listened closely, admiring her courage and determination. It was clear that she had endured much, yet she remained kind, thoughtful, and open-hearted. As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Small stories, jokes, and shared observations about life on the plains and in her travels. Laughter began to fill the room, soft and genuine, as the two found common ground in the small everyday experiences that connected them. It was a moment of joy, a break from the hardships each had faced, and it strengthened the bond forming between them. They realized that despite differences in culture, age, and experience, shared human moments, stories, laughter, and understanding could bridge any gap. The rancher offered her a warm blanket again, and she accepted it with a smile, the comfort of the gesture deepening her sense of belonging. She began to feel as though this place, this night, and this man could be a small home away from home, even if only temporarily. The fire continued to crackle. The wind outside blew stronger, but inside there was a sense of calm, trust, and companionship. It was a night neither would forget, a night where strangers became friends, and warmth extended beyond the fire to the hearts of both. Past. As the clock in the corner ticked steadily, the rancher noticed that the girl's eyes were growing heavy. He suggested she rest more fully, offering his spare blanket and a pillow. Desk. She accepted, lying down near the fire, where the warmth of the flames would continue to comfort her.
He watched her for a moment, ensuring she was comfortable and safe.
There was a deep satisfaction in knowing that he had helped someone in need, and in return he felt a quiet joy at having shared stories, laughter, and understanding with someone so remarkable. The night stretched on, and the house settled into silence. Outside, the plains were dark and cold, but inside, warmth, safety, and trust filled the space. The Apache girl slept peacefully, her body finally relaxed after the long journey. The rancher remained awake for a while, tending the fire and reflecting on the evening. He realized that in helping another, he had gained much more than he had given. The simple acts of offering warmth, food, and a listening ear had created a bond that neither time nor distance could easily erase. It was a night of learning, of sharing, and of understanding, a night that marked the beginning of a story that would continue in the days to come. The night had grown darker, but inside the ranch house, the fire still glowed warmly.
Apache girl had finally fallen asleep in the chair by the hearth, the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders.
The rancher moved quietly through the house, checking doors and windows, ensuring that everything was safe. The wind outside had picked up, whistling through the gaps in the wooden walls, rattling the windows, and making the old structure groan under its pressure. The rancher was used to these sounds. They were a normal part of life on the plains. But tonight, something about the wind felt different, sharper, almost urgent, as if the elements themselves were testing the quiet of the house. He returned to the kitchen to check on the stew he had left simmering. The aroma of vegetables and meat filled the room, comforting and familiar. Yet, just as he was about to stir the pot, he noticed movement outside the window. At first he thought it was the shadows of the trees dancing in the wind. But then he realized one of the cattle pens was open. One of the younger cows had managed to push the gate loose, likely scared by the gusting wind. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. He knew that even a small mistake like this could be dangerous. If the cow wandered too far into the plains, it could be lost or worse, injured by the uneven terrain or the night's chill. Without a moment's hesitation, he moved to put on his coat and boots. As he did, the Apache girl stirred in her sleep and blinked awake. "Is something wrong?" she asked groggily, rubbing her eyes. The rancher shook his head, trying to reassure her. The wind pushed one of the gates open.
"One of the cows is out. I need to bring it back before it wanders too far."
She nodded, instantly alert despite her tiredness. "Can I help?" she asked. Breaths. Her voice carried determination, the same quiet courage he had noticed since the evening began. He smiled faintly. Inspiration.
"Yes, you can help me round it up."
"But be careful. The ground is slippery, and the wind can push you off balance." They stepped outside together, the cold air biting at their faces. The plains stretched out in darkness, only faintly illuminated by the moon peeking through broken clouds. The rancher pointed toward the gate. "The young one went that way," he said, and together they moved carefully across the uneven ground. The wind tugged at their clothes, trying to push them back, but they pressed on, each step measured and deliberate. The girl followed closely, her small frame steady despite the chill and the darkness. "Break." She moved with grace, careful not to make sudden movements that might startle the cow further. The cow was near the edge of a small ridge, its eyes wide and its hooves struggling to find solid footing. Beat. It bleated softly, startled by the humans approaching. the sound almost swallowed by the roaring wind. The rancher raised his hand to comment, speaking in a low, steady voice.
Easy. Easy now. Come on, little one.
The girl mimicked his tone, adding soft words of reassurance, her voice gentle but firm. So together they created a quiet space of calm amidst the chaos of the storm. It was a delicate dance. Approach too quickly, and the cow would run further into danger. Move too slowly, and the cold could tire it out. Timing, patience, and understanding were everything. Step by step, they guided the cow back toward the open gate. The rancher noticed the girl's focus and determination, her quick thinking as she positioned herself to block the animal from wandering off. She suggested angles, gently coaxing the cow in the right direction. He was impressed. Despite her youth and the fact that she had never worked a ranch before, she moved like someone who understood animals, someone who respected them and knew how to earn their trust. Her courage was quiet but strong, and it matched the calm authority he had learned to carry over years of ranch life. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew stronger, knocking the girl slightly off balance.
She stumbled, but the rancher caught her arm just in time.
"Careful," he said, steadying her.
Rick.
She smiled faintly, grateful but undeterred.
I'm okay, she said.
"Let's keep going." They moved together, carefully navigating the uneven terrain, until finally they reached the open gate.
The rancher pushed it gently, and the cow walked back into the pen, its breathing heavy but unharmed.
Both of them exhaled, the tension of the moment melting away into relief.
The girl's cheeks were flushed from the cold and exertion, but her eyes sparkled with a mixture of pride and exhilaration.
The rancher clapped her lightly on the shoulder. "Good work," he said. "You stayed calm. That's what matters." Brask inside the house. They shed their coats and boots, shaking off the cold. The fire crackled invitingly, and the rancher brought another cup of tea for the girl. Brown in despair, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the chase. They sat near the fire, warming themselves, and for a moment neither spoke. The room was filled with a comfortable silence, broken only by the gentle popping of the firewood. The girl looked at the rancher and smiled faintly. "I've never done anything like that before," she admitted.
But
It felt right. "Why do—" Keeping it calm. He nodded, understanding perfectly. "Sometimes the right thing is just about keeping your head clear and your heart steady." "You did that well." As the night went on, the rancher noticed that the girl was beginning to relax more fully, but she spoke more freely now, sharing small stories about her life, her travels, and the challenges she had faced. She told him about nights spent alone on unfamiliar trails, learning to trust her instincts and the kindness of strangers when it came. She spoke of the lessons her elders had taught her, lessons about courage, patience, and the importance of community. The rancher listened carefully, finding parallels with his own life. He realized that although their worlds were different, the values they held dear were remarkably similar. The girl, in turn, asked questions about the rancher's life. Breaths. She was curious about how he managed such a large property alone, how he cared for so many animals, and how he faced the challenges of isolation. He told her stories of early mornings before the sun rose, of storms that threatened the fences and the cattle, and of long nights spent repairing what nature had broken. He spoke honestly about the loneliness that sometimes accompanied life on the plains, but also about the rewards, the satisfaction of hard work, the beauty of the land, and the quiet joy of knowing you had done your best. First, she listened, fascinated, realizing that the rancher's strength was quiet, rooted in experience and resilience. Their conversation shifted naturally to smaller things, laughter over minor mistakes, tales of curious animals, and shared observations about the stars and the plains. The girl laughed softly at a story about a mischievous calf that had escaped and wandered into a neighbor's field, and the rancher chuckled at her amusement.
They shared a warmth that went beyond the fire, a bond formed through trust, teamwork, and mutual respect.
The crisis with the cow had been small, but it had revealed something deeper, that together they could face challenges, support each other, and learn from one another. As the clock inched toward midnight, the wind outside began to subside, leaving only the quiet hum of the night. The fire still glowed warmly, and the room felt safe and comforting. The rancher could see the girl's fatigue now fully catching up with her. Her eyelids grew heavy and she leaned back in her chair, allowing the blanket to cover her more fully. He glanced at her and smiled, feeling a sense of contentment and pride. Tonight had tested both of them, but it had also strengthened their connection. They had faced a challenge together, and in doing so had discovered mutual trust, respect, and a quiet joy in cooperation. Before allowing her to sleep fully, the rancher made sure everything was secure once again. Doors locked, windows latched, and the animals safe for the night. He then returned to the fire, settling into his chair with a sigh. Breaths. The room was peaceful, filled only with the soft crackle of flames. He reflected on the events of the evening, the arrival of the Apache girl, the unexpected challenge with the cow, and the way they had worked together. He realized that the night had been about more than just keeping warm or completing chores. It had been a lesson in patience, courage, and the strength that comes from helping and trusting one another. The Apache girl slept peacefully now. Her face relaxed, a faint smile hinting at the pride she felt. She had stepped into the unknown, faced a challenge, and contributed meaningfully. The rancher admired her resilience, her calm under pressure, and her willingness to learn quickly. He recognized that these qualities would serve her well in life, no matter where her journey took her next. For his part, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping her had reminded him why he loved the plains, the ranch, and the simple joys of human connection. Outside, the plains were dark and still, the wind now a gentle whisper. The ranch house stood firm, a beacon of warmth and safety in the vast open landscape. Inside, the fire continued to glow, reflecting the quiet strength and connection that had formed between two very different people. The night had been challenging, but it had also been rewarding, a testament to the power of cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. It was a night they would both remember, not for the fear or the cold, but for the courage, trust, and quiet triumph they had shared together. The first light of dawn seeped slowly through the wooden windows of the ranch house. The fire and the hearth had burned low during the night, leaving behind glowing embers that cast a soft golden light across the room. The Apache girl stirred slightly, stretching her arms and letting out a quiet sigh. The warmth of the blanket and the safety of the house had brought her a deep, peaceful sleep, the kind that had been missing from her life for several nights. She opened her eyes and glanced around, noticing the quiet stillness of the ranch. Everything seemed calm, serene, as if the plains themselves were holding their breath, welcoming a new day. The rancher was already awake, standing near the fire with a cup of tea in his hands. He had spent the early morning checking on the animals, making sure the pens were secure and the cattle had enough water. He looked at the girl and smiled, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had rested well, and he could see the energy returning to her face. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, smiling faintly, still wrapped in the blanket. "Yes," she replied. "I haven't slept like that in a long time." "Thank you." Her voice carried gratitude that was both simple and deep, the kind that could not be spoken lightly. They moved quietly through the morning, allowing the peacefulness of the ranch to fill the air around them. The girl stepped outside for a moment, taking in the cool, fresh air. The plains stretched endlessly, bathed in soft morning light, dew glistening on the grass, and the faint outlines of distant hills appearing against the horizon. Breathed deeply, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. The rancher watched her quietly, noting the way she seemed to absorb every detail, the way the sunlight touched the tips of the grass, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant calls of birds greeting the day. There was a simplicity to the scene, yet it felt profound, a moment that reminded both of them of the quiet beauty of life. Breakfast was simple but satisfying. Warm bread, fresh eggs, and the remains of the stew from the previous night. They ate together, exchanging small conversation about the day ahead. The rancher asked the girl if she would like to help with some chores around the ranch before she continued her journey.
She agreed willingly, eager to learn more and contribute. Together they fed the animals, checked fences, and performed the small, careful tasks that kept the ranch running smoothly.
It was not difficult work, but it required attention, patience, and care, qualities both of them had in abundance. As they worked side by side, the Apache girl began to share more of her story. She spoke of the people in her community, the elders who had taught her lessons of patience, courage, and respect, and the journey that had brought her this far. She told the rancher about the long nights under open skies, the lessons she had learned from nature, and the kindness of strangers who had helped her along the way. Each story revealed a part of her character: resilience, thoughtfulness, and a strong sense of independence. The rancher listened carefully, seeing in her words the echoes of his own life, the lessons learned from years of solitude and hard work. In turn, the rancher shared more about his experiences. He told her about the challenges of ranch life, the nights spent in stormy weather, the hard work that went into raising healthy animals, and the satisfaction of seeing a day's labor result in something tangible. He spoke of the quiet joys that came from living in harmony with the land, from understanding its rhythms, and from knowing that effort and patience would always bear fruit. The girl listened intently, recognizing the wisdom in his words and the shared values between them. Despite their different worlds, they were connected by common principles: respect, courage, patience, and the desire to do right by others.
As the day progressed, they paused to rest by the fire in the main room.
The Apache girl wrapped herself in a blanket, sipping water and watching the flames dance. The rancher sat nearby, his hands resting on his knees, observing her quietly. There was a sense of contentment between them, a shared understanding that transcended words.
The experiences of the previous night, the cow escaping the storm, the teamwork required, had created a bond that was both fragile and strong.
They had relied on each other, learned from each other, and respected each other's abilities. It was a connection built on trust, cooperation, and mutual care. Finally, the time came for the girl to continue her journey. She packed her small bag, careful to tuck away every item neatly. She looked around the ranch house one last time, her eyes lingering on the fire, the wooden walls, and the simple furniture that had provided her warmth and safety. The rancher stood by the door holding the coat she had worn the night before. He handed it to her, his expression calm but thoughtful. "It's going to be colder outside," he said. "Psst. Keep this on, and take care of yourself." She nodded, slipping into the coat and tightening it around her shoulders. There was a pause, a moment where neither spoke, both recognizing the weight of the farewell. The Apache girl stepped outside, the cold morning air brushing against her face. She looked back at the rancher, her eyes reflecting gratitude, respect, and a hint of sadness.
Thank you,
she said softly, "but for everything. For warmth, safety, and for trusting me." The rancher nodded, his eyes steady, conveying more than words ever could. "Take care," he replied. "And remember, strength comes from patience, courage, and understanding. Keep those close, and you'll do well wherever life takes you."
She smiled, the corners of her lips lifting slightly despite the chill.
As she walked toward the path leading away from the rancher watched her go. Each step she took seemed measured, deliberate, and confident. He felt a sense of pride, knowing that she had faced challenges and emerged stronger, that she had learned, even in a small way, the quiet lessons of trust and teamwork. She glanced back once more, a faint wave of her hand acknowledging the bond they had shared. The rancher waved back, feeling the lingering warmth of connection that no distance could diminish. The plains stretched endlessly before her, wide and open, yet the memory of the ranch, the fire, the warmth, the companionship followed her like a gentle guide. Every step carried a mixture of reflection and determination. She thought about the night of the storm, the cow that had wandered, and the way they had worked together to solve the problem. It was a reminder that challenges were not obstacles, but opportunities. Opportunities to learn, grow, and build trust with those willing to help. She carried this lesson with her, knowing that it would serve her in the days and nights ahead. Back at the ranch, the rancher returned inside, closing the door behind her. He stood by the fire for a moment, letting the warmth wash over him. He thought about the night they had shared, the challenges, the stories, and the quiet moments of understanding. There was satisfaction in knowing that he had made a difference, however small, in someone's life. He reflected on the lesson he had learned as well. Kindness, trust, and patience were never wasted. Even a single night could create bonds that lasted long after the fire had burned down. The day continued, and life on the ranch resumed its steady rhythm. The cattle grazed, the wind whispered across the plains, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Yet, the memory of the Apache girl lingered in the rancher's mind. He realized that human connections, even brief ones, had the power to transform ordinary days into moments of meaning and reflection. Desk. He continued his work, repairing fences, checking water troughs, and tending to the animals, but his heart carried the warmth of shared trust and understanding. Meanwhile, the Apache girl walked steadily across the plains, her coat wrapped tightly, her bag secured, and her mind full of lessons from the night at the ranch. She thought about the rancher's quiet strength, his patience, and his willingness to help without expectation. She reflected on the moments of cooperation, the shared laughter, and the mutual respect that had developed so naturally. Each memory strengthened her resolve, teaching her that trust and kindness were as valuable as courage and determination. As she continued her journey, the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across the fields and hills. The plains were alive with light and movement. The wind rustled through the grass, birds called to one another, and the distant mountains glowed in the morning sun. The Apache girl felt a sense of peace, a feeling of balance between the challenges of the world and the support of those willing to help. She carried forward not just the warmth of the ranch house, but the deeper understanding that human connection could provide. Strength, courage, and guidance even in the vastest and loneliest places. The farewell had been quiet, yet it was meaningful. Neither the rancher nor the girl needed elaborate words or gestures. The trust and respect they had built in a single night were enough to leave a lasting impression on both. They had faced a challenge together, learned from one another, and created a bond that would remain, even as distance separated them. It was a reminder that life was full of fleeting moments, but some of them could leave a mark on the heart that lasted forever. By the time the girl disappeared from view along the distant path, the rancher returned to his daily chores with a sense of calm. The wind had softened, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the sun warmed the earth. He felt a quiet joy in knowing that his home had been a place of refuge and trust for someone who needed it. Breaths. He reflected on the simplicity of the night's lesson. Warmth, safety, and human connection were gifts that could be given freely, without expectation, and yet they could change lives in ways words could never fully describe. The rancher sat once more by the fire, thinking about the Apache girl and the events of the past night. He realized that even small acts, offering a seat by the fire, a warm blanket, or a listening ear, could create ripples of meaning. He understood that life's greatest lessons often came from simple experiences, from shared moments of trust and cooperation, and from the quiet recognition that people, no matter how different, could help and learn from one another. In the days and weeks that followed, the memory of the girl remained with him. He found himself recalling her stories, her courage, and the way she had faced challenges with determination and calm. And somewhere, on distant plains, the Apache girl carried the memory of the rancher and his kindness, the warmth of the fire, and the lessons of trust and teamwork. Their paths might not cross again, but the impact of that single night, of shared warmth, respect, and understanding, would remain with both of them for a lifetime.